Good afternoon. See you today for another lecture in civilization. We have already talked about the age of the Renaissance, and we have seen what impact the Renaissance had on Europeans at the remote times. It was a time of revival, a time of rebirth, a time where Europe noticed some progress in learning, which already led to the rise of other movements, especially religious movements. We're talking about the Reformation. In relation to the Renaissance, Europeans made progress not only in education, learning, but also in another field, another area in another area, which is exploring the outer world, believing that the world was not remote. There existed other parts in the world not yet discovered, never reached before, and never known before. So this time of following the Renaissance, we have another important period in European history, which led to colonial rivalries at that time, in relation to the founding and the building of colonies overseas. I'm talking today about the age of exploration and discoveries. After the Renaissance, especially during this 15th and 16th century, the European countries began the modern explorations of the world with a series of sea voyages. Right? Remember that at that remote times, who controlled trade with India and China, both Arabs and both Arabs and the Italians, Phoenicians. So the Arabs controlled trade until the Mediterranean Sea, and then from Mediterranean Sea, from North Africa to Europe, especially to Italy, this trade was carried by the Italians, especially merchants from Venice, from the city of Florence, Venice, and Genoa. So they were more interested, all right? They were more interested in the Asian goods, especially the spices, which made food delicious, and through spices, food could be preserved. So passing from one hand to another, the goods, reaching other European countries, they became expensive, all right? So this made, especially the Portuguese and the Spaniards somehow jealous. How does it come a small country like Italy could manipulate trade with both Arabs and India and China? Means trade with both Asians and with the Arabs. One of the major impacts of the European age of explorations, overseas explorations and discoveries, is that it increased European knowledge of the wider world. And number two, which is very, very important, getting in contact with African continent, Asian, and the Americas. Remember that we should also remember that those explorations were also meant or were connected with religious missionaries, because they became powerful at that remote times. I mean, the European kingdoms, they became powerful, and they sought to increase their influence in political and religious terms throughout the world. Remember that Spain was, there had been a great Islamic civilization in Spain, and it was, the northern Christian kingdoms, after this great caliphate, was divided into smaller kingdoms. So the Christian kingdoms in northern Spain, after they got united, they started the recovery wars, and they recovered or restored back all the Spanish territory. So they succeeded to reinstitute Christianity as the major religion of the Iberian kingdom at the remote times. So after having this great success in making Spain Christendom again, so they sought to, let's say, increase their religious strength by promoting Christianity in the newly conquered territories reached after exploration. Mm-hmm. The age of exploration took place between 1450 to 1700. Why exactly at this stage? 1450 was the, let's say, 1450, let's say, in relation to the Renaissance, which started in northern Italy. Of course, at that period especially, there existed a number of factors which made people start looking for explorations at the remote times. Generally speaking, I'll be talking about Iran. Generally speaking, the major reasons or the motives for the age of exploration or European overseas explorations were, let's say, can be divided into two. The reasons and the motives for exploration can be divided into two. Number one, the search for new sea route to Asia. Okay, the search for a new route, sea route to Asia. And the second one, advances made in terms of knowledge, which resulted in new navigational techniques, skills, and means. So these were the major, right? These were the major reasons or motives for European explorations at the remote times. Something very important, right? Something very important is that religious factor, and the economic factor were the primary causes for the age of explorations. People were, I can summarize the great, I can summarize the reasons of European exploration as follow to the grand G's: God, gold, and the glory, right? So they were looking for the promotion of Christianity in the newly discovered territories. They were also looking for gold, not only spices, but gold, especially after the discovery of America. So they were looking for gold, silver, in addition to spices and other natural resources, and glory in terms of political strength. Okay, in terms of political strength. Okay, one of the among the factors which made the Europeans look for another sea route to Asia was that the Arabs and the Ottomans at that remote times controlled sea trade to Asia in what was known as the Silk Road at the remote times. You see here in the map, that was the Silk Road. So it was conducted by three main peoples at the remote times. We have the Chinese in the east, Chinese and Indians in the east. Then in the Arabian Peninsula and in the Arabian Peninsula, we have the Arabs. And then in Italy, reaching Italy, we have the merchants of Venice and Genoa. So there were three major, right? There were three major, let's say, poles, three major stations in which the Silk Road was carried. So the goods were carried. The goods were carried either by the Asians or by the Arabs from Asia and India to the Middle East or Arabian Peninsula. Then from the Arabian Peninsula to Genoa and Venice was carried by the Italians. All right. So you see that let's say transported from one region to another. So reaching northern Italy, they were highly taxed. All right, and they became expensive. Also, the Silk Road was somehow risky. So either traveling by land or traveling by sea. So they encountered pirates. So they started looking for other safe sea routes, Europeans I mean, other safe sea routes to Asia, to the land of spices. Okay. Okay, as I have already said, one of the secondary reasons is that the new technologies, the new advances and technologies made in the field of navigation, in the field of sailing and navigation, enabled Europeans to proceed with the exploration. So among the means that navigational means or skills, we're talking about the compass, the astrolabe, and the maps. All right. So we have new technology, and also new ships were built, like the caravels, which had triangle sails. Right. So all these technologies, all those technologies made in terms of, let's say, made people update their knowledge in terms of navigation, in terms of sailing, and acquire more skills. Right. So these were the examples of the new maritime technologies that Europeans had never reached before. We have the we have the compass, we have the sextant, and we have the maps. Right? We have the caravel, as you see here. As I've already said, generally speaking, the motives or the reasons for European explorations can be summarized into the grand 3 G's: God, gold, and glory. So the first grand G is gold, all right? So gold, that remote times, gold was the primary motive for European explorers. So they were looking for, because they believed that acquiring more gold would make you rich. Acquire more gold would make you rich. We also remember that Hernan Cortés and Francesco Pizarro, who destroyed both the great Aztec and Inca civilizations. So their motive was gold, because they knew that gold existed in abundance. So their primary reasons for them was to acquire more gold. Gold also, especially in Europe. So with the rise of mercantilism, a new economic system which turned Europe from agrarian to from agrarian countries to strong countries in terms of economy. So it turned economy from agrarian to mercantile. Mercantile means total reliance on maritime trade. So mercantilism at that remote times theorized that a nation that had a great reserve of gold and silver could be strong, because with gold and silver, because at that remote times, gold and silver would revolutionize economy, right? These are the money that you used to buy gold, used to import gold and silver, which were expensive. Now you have gold and silver. You get them free from your colonies, so no need for from the colonies or from the newly discovered territories. So no need for, you're gonna reserve money. You're gonna reserve money. You're gonna reserve money for something else. All right. The second grand G was glory. All right. Glory at that remote times meant that acquiring more lands or more territories would make kings and explorers, let's say, would make them more notorious, more famous. So that's why competition spread between explorers and also between European kingdoms at that remote times, meaning that acquiring more lands would make you famous and also would make you strong. So in order to threaten your neighboring country, in order to threaten your neighboring country, in order to weaken your enemies, at that remote times, the only thing, or the only way, or the only means was to acquire more territory, more overseas territories after being discovered. Also, explorers. So explorers, European explorers, were looking for fame. We're looking for being seen more popular by acquiring more lands, right? And the third grand G was God. After the rise of Christianity again, especially in the Iberian Peninsula, what happened is that they became, after reinstalling Catholicism, and after expelling the Moors from the Iberian Peninsula, so they sought to, let's say, Christianize the other, or to promote Christianity in the newly discovered territories, especially in the Americas, because they were natives, because the natives there were pagan, worshiping no God. So one of the means of acquiring strength was promoting Christianity in the Americas, especially in the newly discovered territories. All right. Who started the European explorations at that remote times, or during the age of exploration? It was the Portuguese. So the Portuguese were the first to begin European overseas explorations, with the most notorious at that remote times, Prince Henry the Navigator. So Prince Henry the Navigator was the first to encourage sea explorations. It is worth to mention that he was the first in Europe to, not only in Portugal, but in Europe, to establish an institute of sea of maritime sea explorations at the remote times. So in this, in his institute, the explorers or the seafarers used to study ship technologies from reached by the Muslim explorers, So they studied all what was related to navigation, to to navigate, to navigation. I'm talking about navigational skills. I'm talking about the means of sailing and so on. Right. It is worth to mention that before his death in 1460, he was the first to discover Ceuta in Morocco, and then he went, or he explored the southern part of Atlantic Ocean, of the Atlantic Ocean, which resulted in discovering the Gold Coast and parts of West Africa. He reached the Cape Verde, which was part of nowadays West Africa, and there they discovered that ivory and silver was abundant in those territories. So they established. He and the other Portuguese explorers established trading posts in those territories, West Africa. All right. So after his death, Portuguese explorers carried on their explorations, and they reached the southern tip of Africa in 1488, thanks to Bartholomew Diaz. Bartholomew Diaz. So he reached, he rounded, so he went down from Portugal. He went down to the tip of South Africa, what is nowadays commonly known, which is known today as the Cape of Good Hope. Why the Cape of Good Hope? Because at that remote times, no ship was able to reach that part of South Africa, because they believe that huge storms used to destroy ships there. So when they reached this part of South Africa and they returned back, and they survived, let's say, during the trip. So they called it the Cape, they named it the Cape of Good Hope. Okay. Then the Portuguese explorations did not stop at the Cape of Good Hope, the first point in Africa. We have another explorer who, in 1498, commonly known as Vasco da Gama, who sailed around the continent, the African continent, and reached India in 1498. So by reaching India at that remote times, from after sailing southward. So he, let's say, he opened a new trade route to India, and the East Indies and the Asian continent by sailing, as I said, southward, and also this this daring experience would destroy the monopoly of the Arabs and the Muslims who controlled sea trade with India and Asia at the remote times. So we see here. So we see here in the map, he departed from Lisbon in Portugal, passed through the Cape Verde Islands, then stopped for a while in the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa, and then he carried on until he reached nowadays Mozambique and Mombasa in Africa, and from there, from Malindi, he carried on until he reached Calcutta in India. So that's doing so, he opened a new trade route to both India and Asia at the remote times. It was very successful. Also, another explorer, another great explorer of that remote times. I'm talking about Ferdinand de Magellan. All right. So Ferdinand de Magellan is famous of. Also, there is another before Ferdinand de Magellan. Pedro Alvarez de Cabral, another Portuguese explorer, succeeded to discover Brazil, which he claimed a Portuguese territory at the remote times. Okay, then Ferdinand de Magellan, all right. So Ferdinand de Magellan at that remote times was the first to with his crew, was the first to, let's say, make a voyage around the world. So so the voyage was carried on, or he kept sailing for 2 years, from 1519 to 1521, right? Okay. So these were the voyages of explorations you see here in the map, the voyages of, or the early voyages of exploration until 1609. All right, when talking about the discovery of America, we should first ask all right, many of you may ask the question of who were the Americans, who were the early Americans, where did they come from, and so on. So the legend says that the first people who set foot in the Americas came 35,000 years ago during the Ice Age. So these were, let's say, Asians, all right, who crossed the Bering Strait which is a land bridge joining both Siberia and Alaska together at that remote times. So after they reached the American continent, they lived in what is nowadays Alaska for thousands of years. And then when they found that the weather, so they were, let's say, nomads. These were nomads relying on farming and agriculture for their living. So when they found that Alaska, the land in Alaska, could not provide them with farming opportunities, they moved southward. So these were the, let's say, these were the these first Asians who came to America and landed there. The legend says that they were the ancestors of the people who built the three great pre-Columbian great civilizations of the Aztecs, the Incas, and the Mayas. They lived in what is in mountains, deserts, along the Mississippi River in the Midwest. The early groups, all right, among the early groups were the Hohokam, the Adinans, and Anasazi. Of course, they built villages, small villages, and they relied on farming and agriculture for their living, and that's why they were more connected to the land. Of course, they lived in small communities, and the family was the important item of building such a community. As we see here. Good. All right, when talking about the discovery of America, we all know that Christopher Columbus, it was Christopher Columbus who discovered America. But was Christopher Columbus the first one to reach America? He discovered America, yes, but he was not the first one to reach the American continent, to reach America. There are many, all right. In relation to Columbus competitors, there are a lot of theories, all right? A lot of legends about who came first to America, who landed in America. So I have some information or data about, of course, from legends. The first claims that a Moorish sea captain in 889 AD named Hashhash ibn Emir sailed from Cordoba. So Cordoba was the capital of the Islamic Caliphate in Spain at that remote times. So with his crew, he reached the American seashores after crossing the Atlantic Ocean. And when he returned back, of course, he returned back after meeting with the natives who seemed to be of African origins. So they were, let's say, they were blacks, or they were blacks, according to the legend, of African origins. And he brought with him, when coming back, gold and silver. This made him realize that the new lands were abundant in natural resources. So that's why the Spaniards afterwards were much interested in exploring or conquering those newly discovered territories, because they already knew that they were abundant in gold, silver, and other natural resources. The great Arab geographer Al-Idrisi is also known, or best known of, mapping the world in his map, all right? And he mentioned the newly discovered territories, or not discovered, but the American shores, which were reached by the Moorish sea captain Hashhash ibn Emir, by the unknown land. All right. There is another legend uh, about another explorer, let's say, who reached America before the discovery of Christopher Columbus, before Christopher Columbus discovered America. We're talking about a prince from the kingdom of Mali, Prince Abu Bakr. Is said to sail from the western coast of Mali, crossing the Atlantic Ocean and reaching the US coasts, nowadays US coast. So he sailed with, he was better prepared as he had, or he sailed with 200 ships full of food and gold. However, only one ship survived and returned back. So this is what had been stated in. All right. So this is what had been claimed. So I'm going to read this small quotation from a resource, and we are going to see that we are through which we are going to see what happened exactly. We sailed for a long period of time. After reaching the Atlantic Ocean, we entered a river stream with a high, dreadful pressure. My ship was at the back. I saw the ships advancing towards the stream and then disappeared one after the other. So I decided to turn back. So only one, all the ships were destroyed. Only one ship survived and returned back. We have no idea about what happened to the Prince of Mali, Abu Bakr. All right. That's why, all right. So when Christopher Columbus met with the people for the first time, when he reached the American lands, so the people whom he met with were, or seemed like, African natives in their physical appearance. So there is a link between the earlier attempt of Abu Bakr, Prince Abu Bakr of Mali, and the discovery of America. So this confirms that Abu Bakr reached the American continent, and he stayed and lived there. And the people whom Christopher Columbus met were the descendants of Abu Bakr, Prince Abu Bakr of Mali. In the 6th century, another theory emerged, which is more a legend than a true story about. It says an Irish monk, namely Saint Brendan, sailed to North America on a courage. his journey is detailed in the ancient annals of the Ob Island. Although Brandon was a real historical figure who traveled a lot in Europe, but there was no evidence that he made a trip to North America. All right. In the 10th, during the 10th century, the Vikings, who were brave people, made early expeditions to North America around the year 1000 AD. The Viking explorer Leif Erikson, who was the son of Eric the Red, sailed to a place called Verlan, which is nowadays a part of Canadian territory in the province of Newfoundland. Erikson and his crew, unfortunately, did not stay for a long time. And then they returned back to, so they stayed just for a short time, and then they returned back to Greenland, which is part of Denmark, nowadays Denmark. 15th century, there is another theory which is generated by a group of scholars in history led by a British naval officer commonly known as Gavin Menzies. Right? It asserts that a Muslim Chinese mariner from the Ming Dynasty discovered America 71 years before Columbus. Of course, who led the discovery was a marine commander commonly known as Zhang, who commanded at that remote times in the 15th century a huge armada of vessels by which he was able to explore Southeast Asia, India, and the eastern coast of Africa using the advanced navigational skills and techniques that were available at that remote times. Zhang is commonly believed to sail to the east coast of the United States of America and had established settlements in South America. This belief made by Menzies and his group of scholars was based on evidences from shipwrecks and Chinese and European maps and accounts of travelers and navigators at that time. But historians doubt of Chinese first reaching America, discovering America, as I said, because it is full of holes. So it seems that, all right, from these attempts, it seems that Christopher Columbus was the last to venture into America, to discover America. So Christopher Columbus was an Italian. Was Italian from Italy, born in Genoa. He lived years in Portugal, with his father. All right, he became a bookseller, a map maker, and a sailor. He made a lot of he made lot of voyages to Iceland, sorry, and also to the coasts of West Africa at that remote times. What made Christopher Columbus determined to, let's say, to sail westward? Christopher Columbus at that remote times believed that the earth was round, not flat, as claimed earlier before in the Dark Ages. He believed that the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, was a great, was as a great expanse of water surrounding much of Europe, Africa, stretching from Europe to China and Japan Japan in the Far East. So he believed that since the Earth was round, turning around its center. So if a ship left the coast of Europe and sailing west toward the setting of the sun and circled the globe, it would reach the shores of Asia and then making it's returning back to its destination where it departed. This what had been claimed by Christopher Columbus. Christopher Columbus believed that the Earth was round. It used, all right, going around its center, all right. So if a ship started from or departed from Italy and sailing westward, it would reach with the Earth moving around its center, it could reach by sailing westward, it could reach its destination. I mean, the South Asia and India, and then it could make its return back to where it departed before in Italy. So Christopher Columbus did not intend to discover a new world. He was much more interested in finding a sea route to Asia by sailing to the west. All right, by sailing to the west. All right. So what did he do? All right, what did he do? Of course, he was much interested in gaining fame and also in discovering a Western Sea route to Asia that he believed would be much shorter than the earlier sea routes that existed at that times. In 1484, he proposed his scheme of sailing west to China to the King of Portugal, King John II. But unfortunately, his proposal was rejected by the king and the royal advisors. And then he decided to approach the Spanish monarchs, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, At first, all right, at first, he claimed that the distance to China at that remote times could not be possibly true. All right, could not be possibly true. His sorry, but his proposal of sailing to the west, sailing to China through the west, was rejected by the monarch's advisors, because they believe that the distance between between China and Europe, or between China and Spain or Europe at that remote times, could be much longer than what had been expected by Christopher Columbus at that remote time. So what did he do? He believed that. So what did he do? He believed that the distance would be excuse me. So what did he do? He believed that the distance between China and Europe could be shorter. All right. Of course, he made some calculations. On the other hand, the monarch's advisors in the royal palace proved the opposite, and they advised the monarch Ferdinand, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, not to risk money in an unknown adventure, right? And then he, after meeting again, he insisted on his belief, and then he threatened, after his proposal was rejected, he threatened that he would seek help from the King of France. And then here things started to change in the minds of the royal advisors in the Spanish palace. All right. If another king, if Columbus succeeded to convince the King of France to sponsor his voyage, and Columbus proved his proposal to be true, then another country would seek fame, would become notorious, and would succeed in, let's say, taking monopoly of the sea route with Asia, in China and India, and would control trade, would control trade with Asia. So they said, it's okay, we have no risks to take. Let Columbus take the risk. All right, we furnish him, we give him all what he wanted. If he failed and died, it's okay. We have no means that it is not the Spanish monarchs that would be to blame. And if he succeeded, Spain would gain much from this discovery. Then they called him back and met with him in the royal palace. And what happened exactly is that they agreed on, I mean the Spanish monarchs, King Ferdinand and Isabella, they approved his proposal, and they gave him all what he needed in the voyage. They provided him with 3 ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. With these 3 ships, he sailed from Palos, a small port in Spain, on August the 3rd, 1492. They stayed in the Canary Islands for a while, right? And then they resumed sailing on September the 6th. And after 5 weeks of sailing in the Atlantic Ocean, after many attempts, and after the crew got fed up, they threatened Christopher Columbus to return back or to make the ships sink in the Atlantic Ocean. And then he told them, all right, and then he promised them after 2 days, if land was not appeared, he would return back. And on October, after 2 days, after 5 weeks later, right, 5 weeks of traveling, of sailing, on October the 12th, Christopher Columbus and the crew saw land in front of them, right? He landed in what is nowadays, all right, after reaching the all right, he landed in the Bahama Islands. Yeah, nowadays in the Bahama Islands. And when they got out of the ships and on land, so they, Christopher Columbus and the crew, knelt to God, thanking him for saving their lives, and they called, or they named the land San Salvador. Okay. So after his first voyage, as we see here in the figure, after his first voyage, he turned back with some natives and with hands full of treasure, gold, silver, and other natural resources. And then he was titled High Sea Admiral at remote times. Christopher Columbus, as we see here in the map, made 4 voyages before he died. All right. So these were the voyages of Christopher Columbus. So the voyages resulted in, as I said, discovering a lot of well, as we see in the map again. So the lands that he discovered were located in the Caribbean Sea, right? After discovering the Bahama Islands, he discovered Hispaniola, Cuba, Haiti, and so on. All right. Christopher Columbus, after returning back from the first voyage, like other Spaniards, was impressed by, as I said, he was impressed by the treasures that those lands contained, and also he was impressed by the good looking of the people that he met. So I'm gonna read a quote of Christopher Columbus describing them. They are very well built people physically, with handsome bodies and very fine faces. Their eyes are large and very pretty. These are tall people, and their legs, with no exceptions, are quite straight, and none of them has punch. So he called them Tinus. He called them Tinus, as they painted their faces and their whole bodies black or white or red. Christopher Columbus still believed that he reached the West Indies. So the islands that he discovered, the islands before he died, he was convinced that he discovered part of Asia, commonly known as the West, part of Asia and India, commonly known as the West Indies. Means that these islands, or those islands, were part of Asia, and India, since they were located in the West, in the West to Europe. So he, before dying, what did he do? He insisted on people to carry on sailing, and they would reach Asia, and they would reach China and India at the remote times. But he did not believe that he discovered a very huge continent, which became to be which was named after him. All right. Of course, in his second and third and fourth voyage, he brought with him many citizens, because they were expected to, let's say, build up colonies looking for gold, silver, and other resources. So in the next next voyages, the Spanish government decided to explore extensively the newly discovered territories or lands, so that in order to, let's say, bring more treasures in a form of gold, silver, and other resources to fill the Spanish treasury. All right. Of course, we have natives and we have colonies or colonists. What would happen? Of course, what would happen at that remote times? What would happen at that remote times? Clashes, wars, and conflicts between the inhabitants, the Indians, and the colonists. Okay. As I have already said, Christopher Columbus did the discovering, and as I have already said, he believed that he discovered part of Asia, parts of China and India that he called the West Indies. But it was Amerigo Vespucci who named the continent after Christopher Columbus. All right. Like Christopher Columbus, Amerigo Vespucci, was a sailor and an adventurer. He made a lot of trips across the ocean and went down the coast of South America after being discovered by Christopher Columbus, after he heard about discovering new lands, which Christopher Columbus named the West Indies. What made him famous was the accounts that he wrote after his trips. Amerigo Vespucci, when he sailed to the parts or south of the parts that were discovered by Christopher Columbus. So he believed that a new huge continent, all right, that he believed that Christopher Columbus did not only discover few territories or few lands that were part of China and India, but what laid there in those southern parts, as he claimed, I have found a continent more densely peopled and abundant in animals than our Europe or Asia or Africa. So he believed that there was a great continent, what lays here, not only a part of Asia or part of Asia, China or India, but a great continent that was different from Europe, from Asia, and from Africa. The country was densely populated, and there existed a lot of animals, and it was also abundant in natural resources. But who could? All right, he believed that he stated the motion that Christopher Columbus discovered a new world without knowing. All right. That's why in 1507, a German, all right, a German map maker and a printer was the first to name the continent America. Why? Because he read the letters and the traveling accounts of Amerigo Vespucci, and he was also convinced, like Christopher, like him, he was convinced that a new continent laid there, not parts of what Columbus called or believed parts of China and India. So he printed in 1507, after reading the letters and the narrative accounts or traveling accounts of Amerigo Vespucci, he printed a huge map in which he included the new continents discovered, and he named it, which was the New World, right? Of course, it was Martin Waldseemüller who, after printing this huge map of the world, including the new world that was discovered by both Christopher Columbus and after reached by Amerigo Vespucci, he decided to name it America in honor of in honor of Amerigo Vespucci. Why America? Because the land that was discovered or claimed to be a new world was a female in nature, and Amerigo was a male name. So he looked for the female name of Amerigo, and he adopted the name America to the new world that was to the new world. All right. So we see here that was the map. You see here that was the map of the world that was discovered, that was made by the German map maker and printer Martin Waldseemüller. Okay. Something very important that took place, a very important event that took place at that remote times between Spain and Portugal, since both of them competed. Since both of them competed in their Europe, in their overseas explorations. So it might, for this rivalry could make them engage in conflicts. All right, in conflicts, not in wars, but in the discovered territories. So, for example, the Portuguese colonists might attack their Spanish counterparts and take the land from them, and then claim it to be a Portuguese one, So with the intervention of the Pope, in 1494, there had been a treaty line. A treaty was made, commonly known as the Treaty of Tordesillas, which made a division between the territories claimed by both Portugal and Spain. So we see here in the treaty line, all right, the treaty line divided, all right, divided the territories, divided the overseas territories discovered by both Portugal and Spain. So all the lands, as we see here, all the lands discovered and were located west of the treaty line were or remained Spanish possessions, and the lands that were discovered east line remained Portuguese territories. Right? That was the line of demarcation. Right? So, following the Spanish and the Portuguese discoveries at that remote times, of course, news about discovering new territories, news about discovering the new world, news about the riches and the treasures that were found in the new world, arose competition between the European countries to share in the wealth of the new lands or the new territories. So following the Portuguese and the Spaniards, we have the Dutch, the French, and the English who could venture, who were able to venture into the new world. See. Both of the French and the Dutch succeeded to build their colonies or to have settlements. The first settlements in both in North America, especially France or the French succeeded to, let's say, establish their colony commonly known as New France after the explorations made by Samuel de Champlain, who explored the St. Lawrence River. As a result, in 1608, he founded a fur trading post in Quebec, which was the first permanent French settlement in North America. Having a trading post there of fur enabled Samuel de Champlain to do a lot of activities, especially traded in fur, which was with the local Native Americans there, because fur was at a high demand in Europe. The Dutch, all right, before the Dutch, other French explorers shared in exploration activities, like René Robert de La Salle, who sailed to a French colony in Canada and became a fur trader. Before he died in 1687, he made a lot of explorations. We have also Father Jacques Marquette, who explored many rivers in the French settlements in Canada. We have also Louis Joliet, who succeeded to, let's say, explore also many rivers together with Jacques Marquette. We have also Jacques Cartier, famous of exploring the St. Lawrence River in Canada and in the US. Sorry, right? The Dutch also succeeded to establish or to build their colony in North America. They established New Amsterdam, thanks to the English explorer at that remote times, Henry Hudson, who succeeded to explore the Hudson River, which is located in present-day New York, and there they established their first colony, commonly known as New Amsterdam. The colony was established in 1626 later on. The colony, or the New Amsterdam colony, was taken over by the English, which turned to be New York later on. Then at last we have the English. We have the English, all right. The English were the late in the process of European explorations. Because of many reasons, they were late in exploring the New World. After they succeeded to start their building their colonies, 13 colonies in North America, starting from Jamestown colony in 1607. But earlier they started with their discoveries were started by Giovanni Cabuto, or John Cabot, who discovered Newfoundland in Canada, and in 1497, and named it in honor of King Henry VII, Henry VII at that remote times. All right, to finish with, those European explorations had the following main impacts. Of course, native populations and earlier great civilizations were destroyed, and people were killed and ravaged, either ravaged by disease or killed in conflicts. We have also the influx of gold, silver, gold and silver especially, which revolutionized European economies. And we have also the rise of trade between the colonies and the mother countries. Of course, the colonies acted as sources of raw materials, and then markets of finished goods, and the rise of colonial rivalries between the European powers or European countries at that remote times. That's all for today. Next Tuesday and Wednesday, I will have next Tuesday and Wednesday, I will lecture on both Aztecs and Inca civilizations, only for groups 3 and 5, because I are late with one lecture. That's all for today. Thank you, and waiting for your comments and feedback.